We are on part 3 of a sermon series I've been calling The Recap. And recapping the recap where we've been, it's not been as long between part 2 and 3 as there was from 1 to 2. But just a little reminder, this all started when I decided a year ago to do a read through the Bible in a year, and I was watching some videos with it. And from that, I took all the notes that I had made about who God is and put it into various sermons here, but I only decided to do it in 4 parts. So we're going to be covering a lot, but hopefully this will make sense. We were looking at in part 1, we talked about, in part 1 was Genesis through a good chunk of the Old Testament. God's faithfulness, that God's just, he's merciful, his use of imperfect people, his desire for a relationship. Part 2, we were looking at more of the Old Testament in the realm of David and the kings. And we looked at God as a warrior, protector, God's generosity, God's grace with our rawness, and God's wisdom. And now in part 3, we're going to be looking further at the Old Testament, maybe a part of the Old Testament that some of you are maybe not as familiar with. I know that we're going to be looking at some minor prophets, and a while back I was like, I know some of the minor prophets, but I'm not real clear on who's who. I can name them in order, of like if you've ever learned the books of the Bible song, you're like, yeah, this is the order, but don't ask me, who said what necessarily. But as I got to know them better, I was like, they fit into the whole picture. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of them and a little bit of the New Testament as well. But I want to ask this question, because we've been asking a question every time as we're looking at this journey. What happens when someone you trust tells you something that you don't like? How do you handle it? Think about that. Have you ever had somebody you trusted came up and told you something, not that they came up and being mean to you, not that kind of don't like, okay? Like, I'm not saying that. I mean, they say something you're like, I didn't want to hear that, right? But you trust them. Maybe they're giving you some guidance. Maybe they're giving you some thoughts. I know we talked about this at the church before too. But here's the thing. God speaks to us through his Bible, through his word. And sometimes it's hard for us to hear it. Think about that, right? There are things in the Bible that are hard for us to take in sometimes. Sometimes things are just hard because they're hard. Sometimes they're hard because we look at them and we realize that God is actually saying that to us. So we're going to be looking at some of these things. We're going to be putting this together. We're going to get a better understanding of God throughout the Bible. What is this about? What he's talking to us and he's saying hard things. What is this about? So like I said, we are looking at, this is days 201 to 299 in the study that I had done. This takes us from the prophets all the way through the return of the exiles into the coming of the Messiah. And we're covering scripture, everything from 2 Kings to John, which is New Testament. You can see all the books there, Psalms and Old Testament history, Old Testament prophets, right into the beginning of the Gospels. We won't be done with those until the next part of the series. And remember that the verbiage that the gal that I was listening to this past year, whenever we would finish listening to a piece of scripture, she would always remind us, he's where the joy is, God's where the joy is. And I think this is even more important as we're looking at some of these tough things, to be like, he's still that loving, faithful, just, merciful God that we have been learning about throughout this whole section here. And we're going to see, though, the big piece here is that God speaks to his people. I think that's really powerful. God is not silent, he's not distant, and he's not done with his people. In fact, he speaks to warn us, to restore us, and to save us. Think about that. He keeps speaking to us because he cares about us. I've already just given away the punchline, but we're going to be looking at that in more detail here, right? Because he cares, he wants to restore, just like that friend or family member who comes up and says, hey, you were kind of out of line in this area, and you might be like, oh, you might know that, or you might be so, like I've been there, and just so frustrated, you don't even care at the moment when they tell you that. Ugh. But maybe later you do care and you go, they were right, I really was. You appreciate that if you don't appreciate it right in the moment. Sometimes you appreciate it in the moment, I really screwed that up. But at least later you appreciate that somebody cared enough to tell you that you were out of line, right? And that's what's happening with God here. So we're going to look at the first one. And like we were doing before, we're taking broad steps. We're going to look at key stories that tell us about this, and then we're going to look at some application. So number 1, God speaks to warn us. I mean, I think first off, when you probably think of God speaking, you probably are like, yep. And especially if I said minor prophets, your brain's already like, Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff these minor prophets say, and you've got to know the history of where they're lined up. You've got minor prophets that are before the exile, you've got during, you've got after. Who are they talking to? What are they talking about? But here's a couple of ones besides the minor prophets here. Jeremiah. Jeremiah's persistent warnings. If you've ever read the book of Jeremiah, there's some great stuff in there, but there is repeatedly God telling Jeremiah, go tell my people, go tell them, warning, warning, exile is coming soon, very soon. And over again, God is sending messages through Jeremiah. Now, Ezekiel, that's another one. That's another very interesting one. And when you look at Ezekiel, we see many dramatic object lessons. And I don't know if you remember all these. I had to. It's been a little bit since I've read Ezekiel. I had to go back again, even though I looked at it last year, or maybe the beginning of this year. I had to go, what were all these different lessons? But here's a couple of object lessons just for reference of what God asked Ezekiel to do to get the people's attention. There was a time where he was told to cook over a fire. That part's not weird at all, except for God said, well, I want you to go get human feces and I want you to build the fire out of that and cook over that. And he was like, oh, that's gross, God. This is Brooke's paraphrase. But he was basically, that's gross, God. Why would you make me do that? But he was trying to make a point. This is going to be really bad for the people. This is what you're going to end up doing. Now, in God's mercy, I do really love this, is that when Ezekiel said, I don't want to do that, God was like, okay, well, go get cow dung. Okay, that's a little bit better, right? And God said, okay, but you still got to make the point that you guys are going to come to some pretty dire circumstances, and you're going to be cooking over stuff that you don't want to be cooking over, right? I can see your faces. You're like, oh, okay. That was just one, okay? Then there was the time that God asked him to build kind of a miniature of the city of Jerusalem, and then he was going to lay on his side for, I don't even remember how long right now. Imagine being the prophet there, laying on your side, and I'm not even really sure as I'm saying this, these are the same two stories, but these both did happen. Laying on your side for X amount of time that God tells you to, because you're supposed to be portraying the people going in exile, they're going to be helpless, showing them that Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. I mean, God was getting their attention, and there's more within there about Ezekiel. But that's just a couple of examples of some of the dramatic object lessons that God gave Ezekiel. We also have King Hezekiah's son. If you remember this story, you remember that Hezekiah got really, really sick. Okay. And this is it. I think I'm going to die. But he does ask for some mercy, and God gives him a sign, right? He asks for a sign. And he gives him the one about the shadow going back up the steps. You guys remember that story? And if you don't, you can look that up in Kings. And he gives him that sign. He tells him, right, you're going to have X amount of years, right, after this. You will live, but warning, things aren't going to go well still. You aren't going to be there and he tells all the good kings. If you go through Kings, you'll notice that pattern of good, well, mostly bad kings, but you'll see where it says they were a good king or they were a bad king. And you'll see the good kings often, God will say, this isn't going to come in your time. I'm going to protect you. And this was kind of a message to Hezekiah too. This isn't going to come now. Yeah, you're going to live longer, but you're not going to live through this as well. God was very merciful, but also speaking warnings, this isn't going to go well. Like the people constantly turn around, but they also constantly turn around again and mess it up. Does that sound familiar to our lives? But here's the thing. What I think is very awesome about this is that God is a God who won't give up on getting our attention. And that is just one of several. Those are a few of many examples that are out there. He's not giving up on getting our attention over and over and over again throughout each generation. Even the people that I mentioned here are in different areas. God is trying to get their attention, right? And I love that Isaiah 30:18 says this about God. Therefore, the Lord waits to be gracious to you. We're talking about this previously, how gracious God is to us, right? But he waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. He repeatedly tries to get our attention, right? Think about this in another way too. We were talking about that friend. If you were in a part of your house and in another part of the house it caught on fire and you weren't paying attention, and somebody saw that, maybe your friend saw it, and they came over, and they came pounding on your door to tell you, hey, get out of the house, it's burning, the front of this house is burning. Would you want them to keep pounding on the door till they got your attention, or you want them to be like, oh, whatever, no big deal, like, they'll figure it out eventually that their house is on fire and they'll get out, right? You would be like, please keep banging on this house. Please get my attention. Get me out of there. I mean, this is what God is doing. He's banging on that door and say, get out. It's on fire. Like, time to come out now. So we're going to look at a couple of parts that I had pulled out from different days and verses that tells us a little bit more about who God is here. So this is from day 217 of my reading, and you can see this is after reading 2 Kings 22, 23, and 2 Chronicles 34 and 35, and I came up with this. It says, God continues to give warnings in order for people to turn back. Pounding on that house, get out, it's on fire. He also shows mercy in holding off the timing of judgment to come. We see that, again, when I said with those good kings. He often says, but this won't come in your time. It is still going to come because people are not headed in the right direction, but this won't come in your time. He keeps pushing the timing back for the good of his people in that case. Day 229, this is Jeremiah 35 to 37. God seeks opportunities to warn people and gives many chances. Time and time again, God sent word through Jeremiah that destruction was at hand. I like the wording that I used there. It's interesting when you go back and you're looking at it. He seeks opportunities. He's not just like, oh, I just randomly, again, using that house metaphor, I just happened to be walking by the house that was on fire. He's looking for those places where the house is on fire and saying, come out. He's actively looking for people to save, actively looking for ways to get people's attention. And what I love about that, too, is I think so many of us have got this idea about God in our head, about these warnings and things like that, and we're thinking he's being mean, right? We see him almost as if he's shouting down, these warnings, and I just want to get rid of you, I want to destroy you. Like, we almost make him out to be this, like, monster. If you take him completely out of context, right? If you don't put the other things we have in there, you could see how that can happen. But here's the thing as we're looking at that. He's warning us, as we said, not to condemn, but to redirect. Not from that anger, but from a place of love. It says the Lord is searching for the righteous. In Jeremiah 4-6, he's talking about, he's looking for those who are going to listen and turn back. He's seeking for those people. I mean, he's sending out persistent communication. He's not sending one message. Like we said, he doesn't come to the house, knock on it once, and be like, okay, hope you realize it's on fire, leaving. He keeps coming back. And he sends multiple messages, multiple people to say, hey, get your attention. We've talked about this many times, right? You and I each have a different influence. I can say something to someone and they can go, oh, okay, that's nice, whatever. But you can come up and tell them the same thing and they're like, oh, that's amazing, right? We all have different influence. So he sends different people, different prophets to different places, spaces, so that people can hear him. And as we said, he has a patient heart, right? The timing of this, he's very patient. But this is not the only reason, although it's very important, that God speaks to us. So let's move on to our next one. God speaks to restore us. I think we love this part. We don't like the warnings so much. We do need them. But God specializes in new beginnings. There are so many examples in this. But the first one is the story of the dry bones. This is a vision that God gives to Ezekiel about the dry bones in the valley. And they come back to life. And if you've ever read through that, or if you haven't read through that, if you go back to Ezekiel and go read that story, you can see in there, right? They're dry and brittle. They look like they have no life. They're bones. But God breathes new life into them, breathes right into them. What is the message of the story? God is the one restoring. God is the one that's bringing back to life a people that basically their faith is dead. He will eventually, by the way, also bring the righteous back to life too. That's also there. But when we're talking about this right here, he's using this as the faith of the people is dwindled. Who's going to rekindle that? God is, right? God's like, I'm talking to you because I'm giving you a message of hope and encouragement. That is throughout the Bible. That's not just in here. But sometimes the minor prophets are giving them reminders. Hey, keep going. Keep holding on. Yes, this is difficult, but God is with you. He's restoring you. He's renewing you. Another story that I don't know about you, it took me a long time to really comprehend this one, but if you've read through Kings anytime recently, King Manasseh, I can't even say his name now, has a complete turnaround. Now, if you don't know who this is, just a little summary here. This was a very not good king. This was a very, very bad king. I'm very bloody. Very, like, you read the story and you're like, this is bad, right? And you're like, how is this going to turn out? And you read through it and you go, okay, well, he was very bad like many other kings. But you go further down the line and you get this glimpse as he's taken away at one point that his heart is changed. A violent, bloody guy who, I think it is said that nobody spilled more blood than this guy did in the kings. And yet, God persistently knocking on the heart of this man, he wasn't too far gone. Now, in my not knowing anything about this, I've read through that a couple times. I'm like, yeah, he's gone. That's it, right? Because we judge, right? Really, and I was like, okay, he's done for. But he wasn't. God completely got a hold of him, turned this king's life around. Now, were there things that he probably had to deal with? Absolutely. Were there still consequences? Yes, he was taken away. But he made a turnaround. I mean, I think there's so much hope in that. The warnings and everything that had to have been given to him, just like any other king, I'm sure that the prophets that were dealing with him were like, he's a lost cause, Lord. This is a disaster, right? If they were being honest about it. And yet, this guy finally made a turnaround. I mean, if there's hope for this guy, there really is hope for anybody. There's one other story. I don't know if you know this one very well. We are going to spend a little bit of time in this one because I do dearly love this one. And I don't even know if you're going to know this just by the title of it. But it's the Ethiopian's reassurance. So we're going to go over to Jeremiah. I'm going to read it to you because I'm going to take a guess that you're going to be like, I might have read this, but I don't remember this. So we're going to go over here and pick up this story. And this is in Jeremiah's time. Okay, so I'm going to not read the whole thing, but I will give you a little bit of what happened. So Jeremiah, again, is one of those prophets. He's been giving persistent warnings. He's not very popular because of this, as you can probably imagine. And at this point in the story, the officials are like, just throw this guy in a cistern. Okay, so this is verse 4. Then the officials said to the king, this man should be put to death. Why? Because they did not like the message that God was giving to him that he was telling them. They're like, just get rid of this guy. He is discouraging the soldiers who are left in the city as well as the people by the things he is saying to them. This man is not seeking the good of these people, but their ruin. Jeremiah's already said, hey, Babylon's going to take us over. We should just go out peacefully. And they're like, no, traitor, like, why would you say such a thing? But he's like, God has already told us that they're going to take us. But anyways, continuing on. He says, he is in your hands. This is King Zedekiah answered. The king can do nothing to oppose you. So they took Jeremiah and put him in the cistern. They lowered Jeremiah by ropes into the cistern. It had no water in it, only mud, and Jeremiah sank down into the mud. So just take that in for a moment. We all know what mud looks like around here. We know what it looks to be wet. Hopefully you do not know what it looks like to be in the bottom of a cistern. But he's gone in. There's no water, which I guess is a good thing, but he's just stuck. Right? How is he going to get out? But it says this in verse 7. But Abimelech, a Cushite or an Ethiopian, an official, catch this, in the royal palace heard that they had put Jeremiah into the cistern. While the king was sitting in the Benjamin gate, Abimelech went out of the palace and said to him, my lord the king, these men have acted wickedly in all they've done to Jeremiah the prophet. They have thrown him into a cistern where he will starve to death when there is no longer any bread in the city. Then the king commanded Abimelech the Cushite or Ethiopian, take 30 men with you from here and lift Jeremiah the prophet out of the cistern before he dies. So Abimelech took the men with him and went to a room under the treasury in the palace. He took some old rags and worn out clothes from there and let them down with ropes to Jeremiah in the cistern. And Abimelech the Cushite or Ethiopian said to Jeremiah, put these old rags and worn out clothes under your arms and padded rope. So Jeremiah did so, and they pulled him up with the ropes and lifted him out of the cistern, and Jeremiah remained in the courtyard of the guard. Now, that's just a neat story anyways, but there's more to the story. You just have to know the context of what was happening there. So they've lifted him out. So later on, the word of the Lord comes. This is in Jeremiah 39. And I think this is what's so wonderful. The Lord's word is coming back out. Jeremiah has been lifted out. This is verse 15. While Jeremiah had been confined in the courtyard of the guard, so they've kept him safely, the word of the Lord came to him. Go and tell Abimelech, same guy that just helped him out of there the chapter before. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. I'm about to fulfill my words against the city through disaster, not prosperity. At that time, they will be fulfilled before your eyes. But this is so amazing, I will rescue you on that day, declares the Lord. You will not be handed over to those you fear. I will save you. You will not fall by the sword. You will escape with your life because you trusted in me, declares the Lord. I mean, it's a little story just jam-packed in the middle of that. But the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah, and God says, I saw what you did for Jeremiah. I saw what you did for him. I saw your heart in there. And yes, disaster is going to come, but what does God promise? Yes, you will be in the midst of that, but you won't die. You will be saved. You will be rescued. I love that story, and I maybe will make a whole sermon on it someday. I could just sit on that story, but I love that because God promises this man who we don't have much of, who just goes to the king against all the other officials and says, this is not right. He's a man of power, obviously. He's an official. And he says, okay, well, go get him out. He gets him out, and God says, I've seen you. I will rescue you. I will save you out of this. Right? So we talked about this. God is a God who specializes in new beginnings and restores. So looking at day 224, this is from Jeremiah as well. God is the potter. He molds and shapes us. The potter should point us to the creator. You guys probably know that metaphor about the potter and the clay. Day 250 from Ezekiel 34 to 36. I'm sure you know that new heart. This is Ezekiel 36:26. And I will give you a new heart, a new spirit I will put in within you. God is the one doing the work of putting a new heart and a new spirit in us. Right? It's God's work, not our work, that is being done there. So our last point that we want to make here, right, after we have a God who persistently seeks after us, a God who speaks words of restoration, a God who's looking to bring hope into us, now we have the best part. We have a God who speaks by walking among us. It wasn't enough to just send prophets. It wasn't enough to just have the persistent warning of the prophets or to send even messages of encouragement in there. But he comes among us. You get into the New Testament and you realize, oh, this is God among us. This is God in the flesh speaking the words himself to us. And there's several stories there. I mean, one, of course, is the story of Jesus' birth and incarnation. And John talks about him. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. It came to dwell among us. Right? We see this when I didn't get all the way through, like I said, the New Testament, so we're only going to hit a couple stories in here today. We see this when Jesus goes to heal the man at the pool, the mercy, the compassion that he has for this man who can't get up, who can't help himself up, and then yet he goes out, right? Goes to look for this man. Do you want to get better? Pick up your mat, carry it, walk. And that man gets up by faith. We've seen some of these stories. We did these stories not too long ago when we were doing the series on miracles. We see God and who he is in the woman caught in adultery. The story where she's thrown in front of him and she's ashamed, embarrassed. The leaders are trying to trap Jesus. What's he going to say about this woman, and all the stuff that she's done. And yet Jesus sees past all of them. It says those famous words of, whoever hasn't sinned, you can cast the first stone. They all know they've sinned. They've walked away. And he doesn't even just leave her there either, right? He doesn't just turn away and say, well, okay, you messed up. Look, they're gone. Bye to you. He stops and gives her a word of encouragement. We were just talking a moment ago, right? That same God who's giving a word of encouragement to Abimelech, the Ethiopians, here looking at this woman who's fearful for her life. And the same God is reaching down at her level and saying, hey, okay, you screwed up. This is Brooke's paraphrase for a moment, right? You screwed up, but I'm here. Let's get up, get you out. Let's put you back together. Now, he does say to her, go and sin no more. So he's not like, yeah, go keep doing what you were doing. He goes, we can do better. God's going to work with you here. But that's an example of who God is right there. God who's willing to be there in the middle, in the thick of it. And we can see this in a couple of areas. So looking at day 274, the first chapter of Luke, the first chapter of John, again, wording is so important here. And it said the eagerness of God to start the plan of salvation, right? The eagerness of him to say, I'm coming, right? And all throughout the Old Testament, they're pointing towards ultimately God himself is coming. He will restore you. He will fix it all. They're pointing straight to this, but the eagerness he had to get within the world. If we look at the beginning of Matthew and then Luke 2, day 275, we see God's plans look strange to our human eyes, and yet he took on our form, right? It's baffling when you think of that, of like, okay, God, like you've sent all these prophets, Old Testament, you're telling us all this, and yet he goes, that's still not enough. I'm going to come in person and tell you, in case you don't believe all these other people, I'll come tell you myself. I'll come tell you in person, in the flesh. Now, there's one story that's in this area. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to point this out because I think it encompasses what we're talking about here. And it's the story of the prodigal son. You know this. But while he was still a long way off, the prodigal son, right? He's returned home after spending his father's inheritance. The whole deal. It's a pretty well-known story. And his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And I'm sure many of you heard many sermons on this. But I want to think of this in the sense of what we've been talking about here, about how God speaks to us. And we can look at the father's watching as God's warning, right? He's looking out. He's watching for us, getting ready for us. And we can look at the father at the end. What does the father do while the son is a long while? He runs, right? God's restoring. He's right there in the forefront of that, in that story. And there's so many things we could say on that about in that society, the father would not have been running. But this father does, right? This father is right there, right in the mix of it. He's not waiting to be like, you have to come in my presence. He's running out to the son, ready to restore him. And then, of course, he embraces him, right? What we were just talking about. Like God celebrates with us, like God interacts with us, like we just saw God coming to earth as a human. He's rejoicing, right? Rejoicing over his one son that's gone astray. And the Bible tells us, right, that God rejoices over one sinner who repents. God is sending out an invitation for all. He came in the flesh to send out that invitation. Yes, would he have warnings when he was here on earth? Yeah, absolutely. Did he have encouragement for people? Absolutely. But consider this, when we put this all together. He warns because he loves us too much to let us destroy ourselves. Just like the friend that we were talking about. If you see somebody headed off in a bad direction, you really care about them, you say something because you love them too much to let them keep going. Doesn't mean that they will always listen to you. I get that. There are really hard situations that sometimes you're in for years with family members, right? And you're like, this is not working. Maybe they're dealing with addictions. That's really hard for folks, right? You still say things, right? You still let them know, hey, I love you, but maybe we can't get together as often because of this. Maybe we can't even really be in the same spaces. It can be really hard. But we say those things to our loved ones because we love them and we want something better for them. And God ultimately is the Father we saw in the story. He restores because he's the God of new beginnings, not dead ends. The God of new beginnings, not dead ends. So as we're wrapping up today, let's look at a couple of things putting this together. What do we need the most? As we're talking about this and putting this all together, like who God is, what do we need the most? Maybe now you need his warning to turn back. Maybe you're in a spot and God's calling out to you and saying, stop. Blinking red light, stop. This is not going to work. Maybe you're in an area where things are broken. You need his restoration. He knows that. Maybe you need something to be restored in your life. He knows that. He's an expert at restoring things. Maybe you just need his invitation to walk with him. Come alongside me. Come with me. Walk with me. Be with me. Right? Because remember the central truth we're saying here. God is not silent. The Bible is proof of that. He's not silent. He's not distant. He's not done with his people. He's speaking to warn us, to restore us, and to save us. And that same God who spoke to the prophets and the returning exiles and walked on this earth is speaking to us today. He is not silent. He's not distant. And he's not done with us.